The antiseptic smell of the hospital room burned my nostrils as I stared at my phone in disbelief. The numbers on the screen blurred through my tears, not from the pain of my emergency gallbladder surgery 2 days ago, but from a different kind of agony altogether. Our joint savings account, $37.42. Our investment portfolio, completely liquidated. Our retirement fund, drained to the last penny. Over $475,000 gone in the span of 48 hours. My hands trembled as I tried calling Mike again. Straight to voicemail, just like the previous 17 attempts since I'd awakened from anesthesia yesterday. The text I'd sent his sister Vanessa showed as read, but remained unanswered. The truth was becoming unbearably clear. While I had been fighting through a life-threatening medical crisis, my husband of 12 years had systematically emptied every account he could access. What Mike didn't know, what neither he nor his sister could possibly have discovered, was that I owned Blue Mountain Lodge outright. The luxury vacation property that generated over $175,000 in annual rental income went through a separate management company and fed into accounts Mike knew nothing about. The very property where he and Vanessa had spent countless weekends entertaining clients and friends actually belonged solely to me, purchased with my inheritance long before our marriage. The irony might have made me laugh if the betrayal hadn't cut so deep. The property he'd been showing off as evidence of his success had been mine all along, and now it would be my salvation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks earlier, life had seemed almost perfect. As a AD, Senior Financial Advisor at Summit Financial Partners, I had just secured the Blackwell account, a $30 million portfolio that would cement my position for partnership consideration. Mike's real estate development company was reportedly finalizing a major downtown revitalization project. Our modern home in Lakeside Ridge's most desirable neighborhood showcased the life we'd built together, or so I thought. That Tuesday had started like any other. I remembered the sharp pain that hit me during my morning client meeting, dismissed as indigestion from my hurried breakfast. By afternoon, the discomfort had intensified, localizing in my upper right abdomen with a ferocity that finally made me cancel my remaining appointments. Mike found me curled on our bathroom floor when he unexpectedly came home early. "Becca, what's wrong?" His face had shown what appeared to be genuine concern as he helped me to the car, insisting on driving me to the ER himself instead of waiting for an ambulance. "It hurts so much," I'd gasped, clutching my side as waves of nausea accompanied each stab of pain. Something's really wrong. In the emergency room, the diagnosis came quickly. Acute cholecystitis, an inflamed gallbladder with multiple large stones, Dr. Wong explained after reviewing my ultrasound. "Your gallbladder needs to come out immediately. It appears to be on the verge of rupturing, which would be life-threatening." I remembered Mike pacing the small curtained area, checking his phone repeatedly. How long will the surgery take? How long will she be in the hospital? His questions had seemed practical at the time, concerned even. Now I recognized them for what they were: calculations, timing his escape. "Don't worry about anything," he'd told me before they wheeled me into surgery, kissing my forehead with what I now knew was theatrical tenderness. "I'll handle everything until you're back on your feet." I'd believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? After 12 years of building a life together, why would I question his devotion? The marriage hadn't been perfect. His sister Vanessa's constant presence and criticism had been a persistent source of tension. But I'd never once doubted Mike's loyalty. Never imagined he could orchestrate something so calculated, so cruel. The surgery had gone well, but recovery was complicated by an unexpected infection that kept me drifting in and out of consciousness for the first 36 hours. Mike had been there intermittently during that time, always seeming distracted, always with a reason to leave. "Big project deadline," he'd explained. "The investors are getting antsy." When my mind finally cleared enough to check my phone, I'd discovered dozens of email notifications from our bank. Large transfers, account closures, portfolio liquidations, all authorized by Mike within hours of my surgery. By the time I fully comprehended what was happening, most of our shared assets had vanished. "Mrs. Cooper?" A nurse's voice pulled me from my shocked paralysis. "Your vitals are concerning. Your blood pressure is spiking, and your heart rate is elevated. Are you in pain?" "Not physical pain," I managed, trying to slow my breathing. The monitor beside me continued its frantic beeping, broadcasting my distress to the entire floor. "I need to call someone," I told her, my voice steadier than I felt. "My friend Olivia Martinez. She's an attorney." The nurse looked concerned, but handed me the hospital phone when my trembling fingers dropped my cell. Olivia answered on the second ring. "Becca, aren't you in the hospital? Is everything—" "Mike's gone," I interrupted, the words burning my throat. "He's emptied our accounts. Everything we have, everything I've worked for, it's gone." The silence on the other end lasted only seconds, but it felt eternal. When Olivia spoke again, her voice had shifted from friendly concern to razor-sharp, professional focus. "I'm on my way. Don't contact him. Don't contact anyone associated with him. I'll be there in 20 minutes. After we hung up, I lay back against the hospital pillows, trying to make sense of what was happening. Mike and I had met during my second year at Summit Financial. He'd been charming, ambitious, seemingly transparent about his goals and values. Our shared drive had been the foundation of our relationship. Both of us determined to succeed, to build something meaningful. At least, that's what I had believed. We'd maintained somewhat separate financial lives professionally. My client accounts and investments kept distinct from his development projects. But our personal finances had been thoroughly intertwined. Joint accounts, shared credit cards, mutual investments. I'd managed most of our retirement planning given my expertise, but Mike had insisted on having full access to everything just in case. The perfect setup for what he'd just executed. Vanessa had entered our lives more prominently about 3 years ago, after her divorce. Mike had insisted on helping his sister through her temporary financial difficulties, which had somehow evolved into her constant presence and influence. She'd never approved of me, always implying I wasn't good enough for her precious brother, despite my professional success. I'd tried to maintain a civil relationship for Mike's sake, never suspecting they might be conspiring behind my back. The pieces were still falling into place when Olivia arrived, looking polished and professional, despite the late hour. She took one look at me and set her briefcase aside, taking my hand with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out her tablet. "From the beginning." I recounted the events as coherently as I could. The sudden illness, Mike's behavior, the discovered financial transactions. Olivia took notes, her expression darkening with each new detail. "And you haven't been able to reach him at all?" she confirmed, already typing emails with her free hand. "Nothing." His phone goes straight to voicemail. Vanessa read my text but hasn't responded. It's like they've disappeared. Olivia looked up sharply. "Vanessa is involved? That adds another dimension." She tapped a contact on her phone. "David, I need you at Memorial Regional. Room 415, financial. Emergency involving account draining during medical incapacitation. Bring the whole toolkit." She turned back to me. "David Chen is the best forensic accountant I know. If there's a trail, he'll find it." I nodded gratefully, then remembered the one piece of information I hadn't shared yet. "Olivia, there's something else. Something neither Mike nor Vanessa knows about." Her eyebrows raised expectantly. "I own Blue Mountain Lodge, completely in my name, managed through Highland Property Management. The income goes to private accounts at First National, separate from everything else." Olivia's expression shifted from concern to the first hint of satisfaction. "The vacation property? The one Mike is always bragging about to clients? Yes, it was my grandmother's. I inherited it before we were married and kept it separate. It generates substantial rental income that I've been reinvesting. The accounts currently hold about $840,000. For the first time since discovering the empty accounts, I felt a flicker of strength return. I wasn't completely destitute. I still had resources they knew nothing about. Becca, Olivia said slowly, this could be crucial leverage. But first, we need to understand exactly what Mike has done and where the money has gone. David arrived 30 minutes later, a slim man with alert eyes and a methodical manner. After brief introductions, he connected his laptop to the hospital's Wi-Fi and began working through my accounts, tracing transactions, documenting the timeline of withdrawals. This was coordinated and prepared, he concluded after an hour of investigation. The transfers follow a pattern designed to maximize withdrawal amounts while minimizing automatic security flags. They started exactly 43 minutes after you were wheeled into surgery according to the timestamps. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The calculated nature of the betrayal made my stomach clench. Mike hadn't acted on impulse or opportunity. He'd planned this, waiting for me to be incapacitated and unable to intervene. Where did the money go? I asked, dreading the answer. Multiple destinations, David replied, turning his screen to show me a complex diagram of fund movements. Some went to accounts in Vanessa's name at Lakeside Community Bank. Those were opened just last week. Larger amounts were wired to offshore accounts in Belize. The retirement funds were liquidated with significant penalties and transferred to an LLC called Horizon Ventures, which was created 3 months ago. Horizon Ventures? The name sounded vaguely familiar. Mike mentioned that as a potential investment opportunity a while back. Said it was related to ecotourism development in Central America. David and Olivia exchanged meaningful glances. What? I demanded. Becca, Olivia said carefully. This suggests a longer-term plan. If he was discussing this entity months ago, the preparations have been underway for some time. The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a sudden decision triggered by opportunity. This was calculated betrayal that had been in motion while Mike was still sharing my bed, still telling me he loved me, still planning our future together. A nurse entered to check my vitals, frowning at the monitors. Mrs. Cooper, you need to try to calm down. Your body needs to heal, and this stress is counterproductive. Can you give her something? Olivia asked. She's just received some very disturbing news. After the nurse administered a mild sedative, David continued more gently. There's one other concerning element. A life insurance policy was taken out on you about 6 months ago, $5 million, with Mike as the sole beneficiary. The room seemed to tilt around me. Are you saying? We don't know exactly what it means, Olivia interjected quickly. But combined with the timing of the account drainage during your surgery, it raises serious questions. Had Mike been hoping for a different outcome from my emergency surgery? The thought was too monstrous to fully process. The good news, David continued, trying to steer towards something positive, is that we've been able to freeze the accounts. At Lakeside Community Bank, about $118,000 remains there. The international transfers will be more challenging to recover, but not impossible. And your personal property, Blue Mountain Lodge, remains completely secure, Olivia added. They have no legal access to it or knowledge of the associated accounts. I nodded, the sedative beginning to take effect, softening the sharp edges of my panic. What do we do next? My words were slightly slurred, exhaustion combining with medication. You focus on healing, Olivia said firmly. David and I will handle the immediate financial and legal responses. We'll file emergency petitions for financial separation, fraud investigations, and restraining orders. We'll contact the police regarding the suspicious timing with the life insurance policy. What about Summit? I asked, suddenly remembering my clients, my career. The Blackwell account. I'll contact your managing partner first thing tomorrow, Olivia promised. Right now, focus on getting well. That's your only job. As they prepared to leave, with promises to return in the morning, a text alert sounded on my phone. With trembling fingers, I checked the screen. It was from an unknown international number. Sorry it had to be this way. You'll land on your feet. You always do. Don't try to find us. M. I showed the message to Olivia, who immediately took a screenshot and forwarded it to herself. This helps establish intent and consciousness of wrongdoing, she said, her expression hardening. He just strengthened our case. After they left, I lay in the sterile hospital room, watching shadows creep across the ceiling as night settled over Lakeside Ridge. Outside my window, life continued unchanged. Cars passing on the street below, lights flickering on in buildings across the way, people returning home to families and routines unbroken by betrayal. The sedative pulled me toward sleep, but not before a strange clarity emerged through the fog of medication and shock. Mike had underestimated me profoundly. He'd seen me as a victim, a stepping stone, a means to financial gain. He'd never truly known the woman he'd married, never recognized the steel beneath the surface. As consciousness faded, my grandmother's words echoed from long ago when she'd first shown me Blue Mountain Lodge. Always keep something for yourself, Rebecca. Something no one else can touch or take. In this world, a woman needs her own foundation beneath her feet. The wisdom of her advice had never been more apparent than in this moment of betrayal and loss. Through the haze of medication, I made a silent promise to myself. This would not destroy me. Blue Mountain Lodge would be my foundation for rebuilding. And perhaps, someday, for justice. I drifted into an uneasy sleep, unaware that in 3 short weeks, Mike Cooper would discover exactly who he had underestimated and what it would cost him. The next morning, I woke to find Olivia already in my room typing furiously on her laptop. She looked up when I stirred, her expression a mix of determination and controlled anger. "How are you feeling?" she asked, setting aside her computer. "Like I've been hit by a truck, physically and emotionally," I admitted, adjusting the bed to sit up. "Any developments?" "Several," she replied, pulling her chair closer. David traced some additional transfers. Mike made purchases of cryptocurrency before leaving, about $220,000 worth. Hard to trace, but not impossible. We've also confirmed that both he and Vanessa boarded a flight to Belize City yesterday afternoon. "So they've actually fled the country," I said, the reality sinking in deeper. "Yes, but Belize has extradition with the United States for financial crimes over certain thresholds. This definitely qualifies." She paused, seeming hesitant to continue. "What else, Olivia? Just tell me everything." The police took our report very seriously, especially regarding the life insurance policy. They've opened a formal investigation and are treating this as potential attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable person, along with several counts of wire fraud and identity theft. I nodded, trying to process the criminal dimensions of what had been done to me. "There's one more thing," Olivia continued, her voice gentler. "They searched your house last night after we filed the police report. They found something concerning." My heart raced despite the lingering effects of yesterday's sedative. "What?" "Research on gallbladder inflammation. Printouts about foods and supplements that can aggravate gallstone conditions. They were hidden in Mike's home office inside a locked drawer." The implications crashed over me like a wave. The timing of my sudden medical emergency, Mike's convenient, early return home, his calculated questions about surgical timing and hospital stays. "Are you saying he might have—" I couldn't even finish the sentence. "We don't know for certain," Olivia said carefully, "but the police are investigating the possibility that your condition was deliberately exacerbated to create the opportunity they needed. I closed my eyes, absorbing this new horror. Had Mike actually induced my medical crisis? Had my life-threatening condition been part of his calculated exit strategy? The good news, Olivia continued, clearly trying to shift to something positive, is that I've spoken with Richard at Summit Financial. They're fully supporting you and have reassigned your clients temporarily to your team until you're recovered. The Blackwell account is secure. At least my professional life wasn't in shambles. A small mercy in the storm. Dr. Wong entered for morning rounds, reviewing my chart with clinical efficiency. The infection is responding well to antibiotics. If your blood work continues to improve, we might be able to discharge you tomorrow. The prospect of leaving the hospital suddenly filled me with anxiety. Where will I go? I can't go back to the house knowing... You'll stay with me, Olivia said immediately. I've already set up the guest room. My house has security, and you shouldn't be alone right now anyway. Dr. Wong nodded approvingly. Perfect. You'll need support during recovery, both physical and emotional. She hesitated, then added more gently. I've included a referral to Dr. Bennett in your discharge plan. She specializes in trauma counseling. I appreciated the doctor's understanding that my wounds extended far beyond the surgical incision healing on my abdomen. After Dr. Wong left, David arrived with a folder of documents requiring my signature: emergency petitions, account freezes, fraud claims, and requests for financial investigation. I've identified 3 additional accounts Mike opened in the past month, he explained, pointing to a transaction summary. All funded with money from your joint accounts in incremental transfers that stayed just under the automatic review thresholds. The methodical nature of the betrayal continued to stun me. How long had he been planning this? How many nights had he lain beside me, plotting my financial destruction while I slept trusting and unaware? What about Blue Mountain Lodge? I asked. Is it still secure? Completely, David confirmed. I've verified that the property management company has had no unusual inquiries or access attempts. The associated accounts remain untouched. For the first time, I allowed myself to think strategically about the asset Mike didn't know I controlled. The summer rental season is about to begin, I said, thinking aloud. The lodge is already fully booked through September. That's approximately $95,000 in incoming revenue over the next 4 months. Olivia looked up from the documents she was reviewing. That gives us operating capital while we pursue recovery of your stolen assets. Smart thinking, Becca. A tentative plan began forming in my mind, not just for survival, but for rebuilding. I might have lost substantial assets to Mike's betrayal, but I was far from destitute. I still had my professional expertise, my reputation at Summit, my hidden property, and most importantly, friends who were helping me fight back. There's something else we should discuss, David said, looking uncomfortable. The downtown revitalization project Mike was supposedly working on? There's no record of it with the city planning department or development commission. I think it may have been fictional, a cover story for whatever he's been actually doing. With investor funds. Which means, I asked, although I already suspected the answer. His development company may have been operating as an investment fraud scheme, David explained. Taking investor money for projects that weren't actually happening, or existed only on paper. The implications were staggering. If Mike had been running a fraudulent investment operation, the legal consequences would be severe, and I might be entangled simply by association, despite my ignorance. We need to get ahead of this, Olivia said, already making notes. We'll file statements clarifying your lack of involvement or knowledge. Establish your status as a victim rather than an accomplice. As they continued discussing legal strategies, a hospital volunteer delivered a small bouquet of flowers. The card read simply, "Thinking of you during your recovery. The Summit Financial Team." The small gesture of professional support brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Not everything in my life had been an illusion. Not everyone had betrayed me. Later that afternoon, as Olivia stepped out to take a call, my phone lit up with a notification from the home security system. Someone had entered our house. With trembling fingers, I opened the app to access the security cameras. Vanessa was moving through our living room, filling a suitcase with items, framed photos, small electronics, the vintage watch collection Mike had proudly displayed. She moved with purposeful efficiency, clearly familiar with the space and comfortable in her trespassing. I immediately texted Olivia, who responded instantly, "Police notified. Stay on the line with me." For 15 excruciating minutes, I watched Vanessa methodically loot my home, taking jewelry, artwork, and even the small safe from Mike's office that contained our passports and important documents. Just as she prepared to leave, police vehicles pulled into the driveway, lights flashing. The camera captured her expression of shock and panic as officers approached the front door. Then, in a move of stunning boldness, she walked to the door and greeted them with apparent confidence. Though I couldn't hear the exchange, I could imagine her explanations. Just picking up things for her poor brother, whose wife was in the hospital. Just helping out during a difficult time. The sweet, concerned sister-in-law doing a favor. But the officers weren't swayed. The camera showed them examining the items in the suitcase, speaking into their radios, and eventually placing Vanessa in handcuffs. As they escorted her to the police car, her face transformed from practiced concern to naked fury. The officers secured the house before departing with Vanessa and the recovered items. One of them looked directly at the security camera and gave a thumbs up, aware I was likely watching. Olivia returned to my room moments later, her expression triumphant. They've got her on burglary, theft, and possible conspiracy charges. She's claiming Mike asked her to collect their things, but the officers already had our emergency filing showing you as the primary resident and owner. Will they be able to hold her? I asked, still processing the bizarre scene I'd witnessed. Given the international flight risk and connection to the larger fraud investigation, almost certainly, this could be the break we needed. Vanessa might give up information on Mike to save herself. For the first time since discovering the EIE empty accounts, I felt a glimmer of hope that justice might actually be possible. Vanessa's capture was the first concrete consequence of their actions, the first sign that their carefully orchestrated plan wasn't as foolproof as they'd believed. That evening, Dr. Wong signed off on my discharge for the following morning. My physical recovery was progressing well, though she emphasized the need for continued rest and limited stress, a nearly impossible prescription given the circumstances. The body heals at its own pace, she told me. Don't push too hard, no matter how urgent everything else seems. After she left, Olivia helped me pack the few personal items I had at the hospital. My house is all set up for you, she assured me. First floor guest suite so you don't have to handle stairs. I've taken the rest of the week off to help you get settled. Her generosity overwhelmed me. I don't know how to thank you for everything you're doing. You'd do the same for me, she replied simply. Besides, I've always hated Mike's sister. Taking her down legally is actually a pleasure. We shared a small laugh, the first moment of lightness I'd experienced since this nightmare began. As evening settled over the hospital, I found myself mentally cataloging what remained of my life after Mike's devastation. My career was intact. Blue Mountain Lodge and its substantial income were secure. I had true friends standing by me. The legal system was already responding to the fraud. Mike had taken much from me: money, trust, years of my life invested in a relationship built on lies. But he hadn't taken everything. Not my professional expertise or reputation, not my hidden financial resources, not my capacity to fight back. I pulled out my phone and opened the secure email account connected to Highland Property Management. There, in my inbox, was the standard monthly report on Blue Mountain Lodge. Occupancy rates, maintenance updates, financial summaries, and confirmation of the summer booking schedule. Attached was a marketing photo of the property at sunset. The magnificent A-frame structure perched on the mountainside overlooking the lake, windows glowing amber in the fading light. The very image Mike had used in his company brochure, claiming it as evidence of his development vision and success. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine his face when he discovered the truth about Blue Mountain Lodge. When he learned that the property he'd boasted about, hosted clients at, and used to burnish his professional image actually belonged solely to the wife he'd betrayed and abandoned. That revelation would come, at a time and in a manner of my choosing. But first, I needed to rebuild my strength, secure my resources, and establish a solid foundation for the fight ahead. I saved the lodge photo to my phone, a private reminder of the leverage I still possessed. Then I texted Olivia. "Can you set up a meeting with the Blackwell clients for next week? I want to personally assure them their portfolio is secure despite my situation." Her response came quickly. "Already scheduled for Tuesday. They've expressed complete confidence in you." Another piece of my life preserved, another foundation stone still in place. Tomorrow I would leave the hospital and begin the process of reconstructing my life from the wreckage Mike had created. There would be legal battles, financial complications, emotional hurdles, and undoubtedly more unpleasant discoveries about the man I had married. But tonight, knowing Vanessa was in custody and the first steps toward justice had been taken, I allowed myself to rest. For the first time since awakening to discover my emptied accounts, I fell into a deep, healing sleep, not as a victim, but as a woman preparing to fight. Olivia's Victorian home in the historic district of Lakeside Ridge felt like stepping into another world after 5 days in the hospital. High ceilings with intricate crown molding, warm hardwood floors, and large windows letting in streams of natural light. It was the perfect antithesis to the sterile, fluorescent environment I'd left behind. The guest suite she'd prepared occupied what had once been a formal parlor, now converted to a comfortable bedroom with an adjoining bathroom, ensuring I wouldn't need to navigate stairs during my recovery. "The kitchen is stocked with everything the doctor recommended," Olivia said, setting my small bag of belongings on a bench at the foot of the bed. "And I've set up a workstation by the window if you feel up to checking emails or making calls." I sank gratefully onto the edge of the bed, the short journey from hospital to home having depleted what little energy I had. "Thank you doesn't begin to cover this, Olivia." She waved away my gratitude. "Rest now. David will be here around 2 with updates." Left alone, I allowed myself a moment to simply breathe. The physical pain from surgery had diminished to a dull ache, but the emotional wounds were still raw, bleeding with each new revelation about Mike's betrayal. I glanced at my phone, still half expecting to see a message explaining it all away. Some fantastic misunderstanding that would restore my marriage and the life I thought I had. Instead, there were updates from the police department regarding Vanessa's arrest, messages from concerned colleagues at Summit Financial, and an email from the Highland Property Management Company with rental confirmations for Blue Mountain Lodge. I took a long shower, the first proper one since surgery, carefully avoiding the healing incision across my abdomen. As the warm water washed over me, I found myself cataloging all the moments when I should have recognized something wasn't right with Mike. The increased secrecy about his development projects over the past year, the subtle withdrawal from our social circle, his sudden interest in my client portfolio and investment strategies, the persistent questions about my grandmother's estate, the growing presence of Vanessa in our business affairs. Had I been willfully blind? So caught up in my own career advancement that I'd missed the warning signs of his deception? Or had he simply been that good at maintaining the facade of our partnership? After dressing in comfortable clothes Olivia had thoughtfully purchased, for me, my own wardrobe still at the house I'd shared with Mike, I made my way to the sunny kitchen for tea. My phone buzzed with a call from Richard Townsend, managing partner at Summit Financial. "Rebecca," he began when I answered, his voice carrying the careful tone people use with those experiencing tragedy. "How are you feeling?" "I'm managing." "Richard, thank you for asking. I want you to know that Summit stands behind you completely. We've contacted all your clients personally to assure them their portfolios are secure and unaffected by your personal situation." The hesitation before personal situation spoke volumes about how the firm was characterizing my husband's criminal actions. I appreciated the discretion, even as part of me wanted to scream the truth from rooftops. "I'm especially grateful for your handling of the Blackwell account," I said, steering toward professional ground where I felt more steady. "I understand they've confirmed our Tuesday meeting." "Yes." Richard sounded relieved at the shift to business matters. "They've been remarkably understanding. In fact, Jennifer Blackwell specifically requested that you remain their advisor, regardless of your timeline for returning to the office. Client loyalty, another foundation stone still intact. Please assure them I'll be fully prepared for Tuesday. My recovery is progressing well." After the call ended, David arrived bearing a laptop and several folders. His normally composed expression couldn't quite mask his agitation. "What's happened?" I asked immediately, recognizing that something significant had developed. "We've uncovered more about Mike's business operations," he said, setting up his computer on the kitchen table. "It's extensive." Olivia joined us, bringing coffee and a concerned glance at David's obvious tension. "Show me," I said, bracing myself for whatever new betrayal was about to be revealed. David opened a complex flowchart on his screen. Mike's development company, Cooper Urban Renewal, appears to have been operating as a classic Ponzi scheme for at least the past 3 years. The legitimate projects from earlier in his career gave him credibility to attract investors for increasingly ambitious developments that never materialized beyond preliminary renderings and empty lots. The revelation shouldn't have shocked me after everything else, but it did. Mike had built his reputation as a visionary developer, committed to revitalizing struggling neighborhoods. I'd believed in his work, admired his apparent dedication to combining profit with community improvement. "How much money are we talking about?" Olivia asked, her attorney's mind already calculating liabilities. "Conservative estimate? Around $12 million from various investors," David replied. "Some of it was used to pay returns to earlier investors, maintaining the illusion of successful projects. A significant portion appears to have been funneled through shell companies, eventually making its way offshore. The pattern accelerated dramatically over the past 6 months." 6 months, I repeated, the timeline clicking into place. That's when he started asking more questions about my family properties and investments. He was cataloging all available assets for his exit strategy. David nodded grimly. "It appears so. The concerning part is that some promotional materials for his fictitious projects featured Blue Mountain Lodge prominently, positioned as an example of his company's premium development aesthetic. He used my property to lure investors into his scheme," I said, the pieces fitting together with nauseating clarity. People invested in his fraudulent projects partly based on a property he didn't even own. "Which potentially creates a liability concern," Olivia interjected, her legal mind racing ahead. "If investors can demonstrate they were misled using assets falsely presented as his development work, they might try to come after the lodge in legal proceedings," I finished, understanding immediately. David pulled up another document. "There's more. The life insurance policy we discovered isn't the only one. There's a business policy on you as well, listing you as a key person in Cooper Urban Renewal's operations." The implication was clear and horrifying. If I had died during surgery, Mike would have collected not only on the personal policy, but also on a business policy tied to his fraudulent company. "Have the police been informed about all of this?" I asked, struggling to maintain composure in the face of such calculated malevolence. "Yes," Olivia confirmed. "Detective Garcia is heading the expanded investigation. With these new elements, they're treating this as a major financial crimes case, possibly with federal implications given the wire fraud and interstate aspects. I stood carefully, needing to move despite my still healing body. I need to protect Blue Mountain Lodge immediately. If it's been used in his promotional materials, investors might try to claim it once the fraud becomes public. Olivia was already pulling out legal forms. We'll file for additional protections. The good news is that the clear paper trail showing your sole ownership predating your marriage gives us a strong position. As we worked through the necessary documentation, a call came in from Detective Garcia. Olivia put it on speaker so we could all hear. "Mrs. Cooper, we've made some progress you should know about," the detective began. "Vanessa Cooper has agreed to cooperate in exchange for consideration in her charging. She's provided information about your husband's current location in Belize and details about additional bank accounts." Hope flared briefly. "Does that mean you can apprehend him?" "We're working with international authorities, but these things take time," Detective Garcia cautioned. "However, Ms. Cooper's cooperation has allowed us to freeze several additional accounts before the funds could be moved further offshore. We've secured approximately $1.2 million so far. It was a substantial sum, though still far less than what had been taken from me and from Mike's investors. Nevertheless, it represented the first concrete recovery, the first tangible pushback against his schemes. "There's something else you should know," the detective continued, her voice taking on a more careful tone. "Ms. Cooper has made certain claims about your involvement in the business operations. She's suggesting you had knowledge of and participated in the financial strategies." Ice flooded my veins. "That's absolutely false. I had no knowledge of any fraudulent activities." "We understand that's your position, Mrs. Cooper. Given the documentation we've already reviewed, Ms. Cooper's claims appear self-serving and inconsistent with the evidence. However, I wanted you to be aware that these allegations have been made." After the call ended, Olivia's expression was thunderous. "They're trying to spread the blame. Classic move when cornered." "Will anyone believe her?" I asked, suddenly fearful that my professional reputation, the one thing I'd thought was securely intact, might be tarnished by association. "The evidence doesn't support it," David reassured me. "Your financial activities and Mike's have clear separation. There's no documentation linking you to his fraudulent business operations." Nevertheless, the mere suggestion that I might have been complicit sent waves of anxiety through me. Summit Financial managed hundreds of millions in client assets. Even the hint of impropriety could be devastating to my career. "We need to get ahead of this," Olivia decided, pulling out her phone. "I'm going to contact Richard at Summit again. We should provide a complete briefing on the situation before Vanessa's allegations can circulate as rumor." While she made the call from another room, David continued reviewing the documentation of Mike's schemes. The depth and duration of the deception was staggering. Projects announced with great fanfare that never broke ground. Properties purchased through shell companies and then resold at inflated values to create the illusion of development progress. Investor funds diverted to maintain a lavish lifestyle while producing nothing but elaborate renderings and empty promises. And through it all, the image of Blue Mountain Lodge featured prominently in marketing materials. Previous development. By Cooper Urban Renewal, falsely claimed beneath photos of my property. He built his entire fraudulent operation on a foundation of lies, I said, staring at the evidence of years of systematic deception. And I never saw it, never questioned. "Financial predators succeed because they're believable," David said gently. "It's not your failure for trusting your husband." Olivia returned, looking slightly less concerned than when she'd left. "Richard understands the situation. Summit's legal team will be preparing statements clarifying your non-involvement based on the evidence. They're standing by you." Professional crisis potentially averted, we turned to the immediate practical concerns. I needed clothes and personal items from the house I'd shared with Mike. The police had secured it following Vanessa's arrest. but I could arrange a supervised visit to collect necessities. I'd recommend taking only what you absolutely need for now, Detective Garcia advised when Olivia called to arrange it. The house is still considered part of the investigation scene, and eventually there may be asset seizure considerations as the fraud case develops. The notion that the home I'd lived in for 7 years, chosen furnishings for, decorated, maintained, might be seized as proceeds of fraud was another jarring reminder of how thoroughly my life had been undermined. The following morning, Olivia drove me to the house accompanied by a police officer. Walking through the front door felt surreal. Everything appeared normal at first glance, yet utterly foreign. Family photos on the walls now seemed like props in an elaborate stage production. The carefully selected furniture pieces represented investments in a shared future that had never truly existed. In the master bedroom, I methodically collected clothes, toiletries, and a few sentimental items that had been mine before the marriage. The officer watched discreetly but attentively, documenting what I removed. "Can I access my home office?" I asked, needing my professional reference materials and personal financial documents. The office revealed signs of hurried searching. Drawers left slightly open, files not quite aligned, the subtle disarray of someone looking for specific items in haste. My desk had been thoroughly rifled, but my reference books and client research materials remained. The wall safe behind a decorative panel, a feature Mike hadn't known about, was untouched, still containing my pre-marriage financial records and my grandmother's will documenting my inheritance of Blue Mountain Lodge. As I gathered these critical documents, a small object caught my eye in the back of a drawer, a USB drive I didn't recognize, tucked beneath some stationery. I pocketed it without comment, some instinct telling me to examine it privately. In the kitchen, I found evidence of Vanessa's presence before her arrest: a coffee cup with lipstick in her signature coral shade, a designer handbag forgotten in their hasty exit planning. The refrigerator contained rotting food, milk gone sour, small mundane signs of a household abandoned abruptly. "We should go," Olivia suggested gently after I'd gathered the essentials. "You can come back for more another time if needed." Leaving felt like closing a chapter. The house no longer home but a crime scene, a monument to betrayal and lies. I didn't look back as we drove away. Back at Olivia's, I plugged the mysterious USB drive into my laptop. It contained a single, folder-labeled contingency with multiple subfolders inside: investor contacts, offshore structures, exit strategy, and most damning of all, Rebecca. The folder with my name contained detailed information about all my financial accounts, copies of my client portfolio strategies, surveillance photos of me entering and leaving Summit Financial's offices, and most disturbingly, medical records, documenting my gallbladder issues from a checkup 6 months earlier. Information I hadn't even been aware existed, as the doctor had mentioned only minor anomalies, not requiring immediate attention. "He was monitoring my health," I said numbly as Olivia and David reviewed the files with growing horror. "Waiting for an opportunity." "This proves premeditation beyond any doubt," Olivia noted, already photographing the screen as evidence. "And the medical record access is likely illegal in itself." Another subfolder labeled Lodge contained photographs of Blue Mountain Lodge from various angles, property tax records showing my name as owner, and notes about potential ways to gain control of it through marital asset division or by having me sign over management rights. "He knew," I whispered, the realization dawning. "He knew about my ownership of the lodge, but not about the separate accounts holding the rental income. These documents are dated just 3 weeks ago," David pointed out. "He must have discovered your ownership recently, probably while finalizing his exit strategy." The USB drive represented a devastating new level of betrayal, not just opportunistic theft during my medical crisis, but long-term surveillance and planning specifically, targeting my assets, health, and financial security. "We need to get this to Detective Garcia immediately," Olivia said. already pulling out her phone. This evidence significantly strengthens the case against both Mike and Vanessa. While Olivia coordinated with the police, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the depths of deception revealed by this small digital storage device. Mike hadn't just stolen from me, he had studied me like a target, cataloged my assets like a thief casing a home, monitored my health like a predator tracking wounded prey. The man I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had been systematically plotting my financial destruction for months, perhaps years. The extent of the calculated betrayal was almost incomprehensible. David, ever practical, was making copies of all files on the drive. "This changes our strategy," he noted. "Now that we know he was aware of the lodge but not the rental income accounts, we can better protect those assets. And the evidence of his planning undermines any claim Vanessa might make about your knowledge or involvement." The discovery of the USB drive marked a turning point in my understanding of what had happened. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or a husband making a desperate decision during a personal crisis. This was calculated, long-term predation by someone who had made an art form of deception, who had built an entire false persona and relationship while methodically planning how to maximize what he could extract from me. Later that afternoon, Detective Garcia arrived to collect the USB drive, bringing news with her. We've filed additional charges based on Ms. Cooper's cooperation and our ongoing investigation. The district attorney is pursuing wire fraud, identity, theft, conspiracy, and now potential charges related to medical record theft. What about the investors in his fraudulent development projects? I asked, thinking of the $12 million David had identified. That investigation is expanding daily. Several investors have come forward after being contacted by authorities. The SEC is now involved as well, given the investment fraud aspects. The scale of Mike's crimes continued to grow, each revelation more disturbing than the last. What had begun as the personal betrayal of my husband stealing from our joint accounts during my hospitalization had expanded into a massive financial fraud scheme affecting dozens of victims across multiple states. We've also found evidence linking some of your personal account draining to properties purchased in Belize, Detective Garcia added. Specifically, a beachfront development parcel and a small resort property, both acquired within days of your surgery. My stolen assets had been converted into luxury real estate in a country with complicated extradition. The planning was breathtaking in its thoroughness. "Is there any chance of recovering those properties?" Olivia asked. "We're working on it. International asset recovery is complex, but not impossible. The fact that the funds used can be directly traced to accounts emptied during Mrs. Cooper's incapacitation strengthens our position." After the detective left with the evidence, I retreated to my temporary bedroom in Olivia's house, overwhelmed by the cascading revelations. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown international number, the same one Mike had used previously. "You should stop pushing. You won't like what comes out if this continues. Consider what you still have and walk away. Final warning." I showed the message to Olivia, who immediately forwarded it to Detective Garcia. "Witness intimidation," she noted grimly. Another crime to add to the growing list. The threat only strengthened my resolve. Mike still believed he held power over me, could still threaten and intimidate me into compliance. He had no idea who he was dealing with anymore. The trusting wife who had believed in our partnership was gone, replaced by a woman determined to see justice done, regardless of cost. That evening, David returned with additional financial analysis. "I've completed a comprehensive review of your current position," he explained, spreading documents across Olivia's dining table. "Despite what's been taken, your overall financial situation remains relatively strong thanks to the Blue Mountain, lodge income, and your position at Summit." He walked me through projections showing how, even without recovery of the stolen funds, I could rebuild financial security within 2 to 3 years, based on my current income and assets. The immediate, Concern is liquidity for legal expenses and daily living costs while the recovery process unfolds, he continued. The lodge generates approximately $17,000 in monthly income during high season, which begins now. That should cover your immediate needs while we pursue the larger recovery efforts. The practical assessment of my situation provided unexpected comfort. I wasn't destitute or financially ruined, despite Mike's best efforts. I had resources, income, and a path forward that didn't depend on the uncertain process of recovering what had been stolen. There's something else I wanted to discuss, David said, looking somewhat hesitant. The fraudulent development projects Mike was promoting? Most feature properties in the west side district of Lakeside Ridge, an area genuinely ripe for thoughtful redevelopment. Several investors have approached me asking if there's any salvaging of the projects under new management. Why are you telling me this? I asked, not immediately seeing the relevance to my situation. Because the initial concept, revitalizing that neighborhood with mixed-use development that serves existing community needs rather than displacing them, was actually sound. The fraud was in how Mike executed, not in the underlying development thesis. Olivia leaned forward, catching David's direction before I did. Are you suggesting Becca consider taking over the legitimate aspects of these projects? Not immediately, he clarified quickly. But eventually, once the legal situations are resolved, there might be an opportunity to reclaim some of what was lost by restructuring the viable projects under new, legitimate management. The idea was startling. Taking the hollow promises Mike had used to defraud investors and transforming them into actual beneficial developments. It was too much to consider in my current state, but the seed was planted. Something to think about for the future, I acknowledged, filing the possibility away for later consideration. That night, preparing for my meeting with the Blackwell clients the following day, I reviewed their portfolio with absolute focus. The work provided a welcome respite from the constant barrage of revelations about Mike's betrayal, allowing me to operate in the professional realm where my competence remained unquestioned. As I finalized my presentation, I realized that despite everything that had been taken from me, my most valuable asset remained intact: my professional expertise and reputation. Mike had stolen money, undermined my trust, and upended my personal life, but he hadn't diminished my capabilities or knowledge. Thinking of Blue Mountain Lodge and the separate accounts holding its rental income, I understood that my grandmother's wisdom had protected me in ways she could never have anticipated. Always keep something for yourself, she had advised. That separate property and the financial independence it represented had given me a foundation to stand on when everything else was crumbling. Tomorrow, I would meet with the Blackwells, demonstrating my continued professional capabilities despite personal crisis. I would sign the legal documents Olivia had prepared to protect my remaining assets. I would review the expanding fraud investigation with Detective Garcia. And through it all, I would be planning my next steps, not just for survival, but for recovery, justice, and eventually, rebuilding something stronger from the ashes of betrayal. Mike's final warning text glowed on my phone screen before I deleted it. He still thought I would back down, walk away, accept my losses. He had never truly known me at all. The Blackwell meeting exceeded my expectations. Jennifer and Robert arrived at Summit Financial's conference room precisely at 10, both exuding the confident poise that came from generations of wealth management. I had prepared exhaustively, determined to demonstrate that my professional capabilities remained uncompromised despite my personal turmoil. "Rebecca!" Jennifer greeted me with unexpected warmth, clasping my hand in both of hers. "We were so concerned when Richard told us about your surgery. How are you recovering?" "Much better, thank you," I replied, grateful she had mentioned only the medical aspect of my situation. "I appreciate your flexibility with rescheduling." Robert nodded, his expression conveying more understanding than I had anticipated. Richard mentioned you've been dealing with some challenging personal circumstances as well. We want you to know that doesn't affect our confidence in your management of our portfolio." The simple statement of trust nearly undid my carefully maintained composure. In a world that had become quicksand beneath my feet, their steady confidence felt like solid ground. "That means more than I can express," I acknowledged. "I've prepared a comprehensive overview of your current positions and my recommendations for the coming quarter." For the next 90 minutes, we immersed ourselves in portfolio analysis, market trends, and investment strategies. The Blackwells asked insightful questions, engaged with my recommendations, and ultimately approved the adjustments I'd suggested to strengthen their positions against anticipated market fluctuations. As we concluded, Jennifer hesitated before gathering her belongings. "Rebecca, I hope you don't find this intrusive, but I feel I should share something with you." She glanced at her husband, who nodded encouragement. "Shortly before you took over our account, we had a rather uncomfortable interaction with your husband." My breath caught. What kind of interaction? He approached us about investing in one of his development projects, quite aggressively. In fact, when we declined, saying we preferred to work through established financial channels, he suggested that as your clients, we might reconsider as a professional courtesy to you. The implication was clear. Mike had attempted to leverage my client relationships for his fraudulent schemes. "I want to assure you that I had no knowledge of this," I said carefully. "My husband's business dealings were entirely separate from my work at Summit." Robert's expression softened. "We gathered as much from your reaction just now. We declined his offer and didn't mention it earlier because we didn't want to create tension between spouses. But given what Richard has delicately referred to as changed circumstances, we thought you should know." "When was this?" I asked, already mentally fitting this new piece into the timeline of Mike's deceptions. "About 4 months ago," Jennifer confirmed, "at the Lakeside Ridge Economic Development Gala." The timing aligned with the acceleration of his fraudulent activities that David had identified. 4 months ago, Mike had already been executing his exit strategy, looking for quick capital infusions from any available source, including my clients. "Thank you for telling me," I said sincerely. "This information is actually helpful to my understanding of the situation." After they left, Richard stopped by the conference room, clearly having waited nearby for the meeting's conclusion. "How did it go?" "They're keeping their portfolio with me," I confirmed. "And they provided some useful information about Mike's attempts to recruit them as investors." Richard's expression darkened. "He approached Summit clients directly? Without disclosing to you?" "Apparently so. I'm gathering this wasn't an isolated incident?" He hesitated, then sighed heavily. "We've received calls from 3 other clients since news of the fraud investigation became public, all reporting similar approaches from Mike over the past 6 months." The realization that Mike had been systematically targeting my client base, people who trusted me with their financial futures, added another dimension to his betrayal. He hadn't just stolen from me. He had attempted to use my professional relationships as pathways to potential victims. "I need to know which clients he contacted," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "They need to be warned explicitly, and I should speak with each of them personally." Richard agreed, and by that afternoon, I had a complete list of 7 Summit clients Mike had approached about his fictional development projects. The common thread was obvious. All were high-net-worth individuals with substantial liquid assets available for investment. Returning to Olivia's house that evening, I found Detective Garcia waiting with new developments. The Belizean authorities had located the beachfront property purchased with my stolen funds, but Mike himself had already moved on, apparently tipped off about the investigation. "We've traced a private charter flight to Costa Rica," she explained, spreading a map across the coffee table. "We believe he's attempting to establish a false identity there while moving remaining assets into increasingly obscure holdings." "What about the Belize property?" I asked. Thinking of the substantial sum it represented, we've filed for asset freezing and are coordinating with local authorities. The process for reclamation will take time, but the documentation is strong. The property was purchased directly with funds transferred from your joint account during your hospitalization. David arrived as we were discussing recovery prospects, bringing financial documents requiring my signature. I've established a secure account structure for the Blue Mountain Lodge income, he explained. Protected by multiple verification layers and completely separate from anything Mike might have information about. While Detective Garcia continued her briefing on the international aspects of the investigation, my phone rang with a call from Highland Property Management, which oversaw Blue Mountain Lodge. Ms. Cooper? This is Thomas Reynolds from Highland. We've had an unusual situation at the lodge I wanted to make you aware of. What kind of situation? I asked, immediately concerned. A woman attempted to gain access to the property this morning, claiming to be authorized by the owner. When our on-site manager requested identification, she became quite hostile and threatened legal action. Did she give a name? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Vanessa Cooper. She claimed to be the sister-in-law of the owner and stated she had permission to use the property for business purposes. Vanessa had been released on bail that morning, according to Detective Garcia. Her first action had been to attempt to access the one significant asset she knew about, but couldn't steal during the initial account draining. She has absolutely no authority regarding the property, I confirmed. Under no circumstances should she be granted access. In fact, please alert local police if she returns. Already done, Ms. Cooper. We've also increased security monitoring and instructed staff to be on alert. After concluding the call, I shared the development with Detective Garcia, who immediately contacted the prosecutor handling Vanessa's case. This likely violates the terms of her bail, she explained, attempting to access disputed assets related to the case. The next morning brought another disturbing development. The local business journal had published an article about Mike's fraudulent development company, including interviews with several defrauded investors. Most alarmingly, the article contained insinuations that I might have had knowledge of the schemes due to my financial expertise and marriage to Mike. This is exactly what we were concerned about, Olivia fumed, reading the article over breakfast. Vanessa's allegations gaining traction through media speculation. We need to respond, I decided. Not defensively, but with complete transparency. Against Olivia's initial reservations, I contacted the journal's editor directly and offered a comprehensive interview, providing full documentation of my own victimization and the evidence establishing my non-involvement in Mike's fraudulent operations. The reporter who arrived at Olivia's house that afternoon, Kate Russell, had a reputation for thorough investigative work. I held nothing back, sharing the details of how Mike had emptied our accounts during my surgery, the discovery of his long-term planning as revealed by the USB drive, and the expanding investigation into his investor fraud. The timing of this was not coincidental, I explained, showing her the medical records Mike had accessed and monitored. My hospitalization provided the opportunity he had been waiting for, a period when I would be unable to monitor accounts or question transactions. Kate reviewed the documentation with professional thoroughness. And you had no indication of his fraudulent business activities prior to this? None. Mike maintained an elaborate facade of legitimate development work. He produced convincing renderings, hired actual architects for preliminary designs, and created a paper trail of property acquisitions through shell companies. From the outside, even from the perspective of his spouse, it appeared genuine. Yet you're a financial professional, she noted, without accusation but raising the obvious question. Didn't that give you insight others might have lacked? My expertise is in portfolio management and investment strategy, not real estate development or corporate finance. Mike and I maintained separate professional lives by mutual agreement. In retrospect, that separation provided the perfect cover for his activities. The interview lasted over 2 hours, with Kate methodically working through the timeline of events, the evidence recovered, and the ongoing investigations. By the end, her initial skepticism had visibly shifted toward conviction of my innocence. "One last question," she said as she gathered her materials. "What do you want to happen now? To your husband? To the stolen assets? To the development projects left in limbo?" I considered my answer carefully. I want justice. Not just for myself, but for all the investors who trusted Mike with their money. I want recovery of what was stolen, though I'm realistic about the challenges of international asset tracing. And eventually, I'd like to see some of the legitimate aspects of these development concepts actually implemented under ethical management for the benefit of the community. The article published 3 days later was remarkable for its thoroughness and objectivity. Kate had included all the evidence I'd provided, alongside interviews with investigators, defrauded investors, and financial crime experts. The headline read, "Financial Advisor Among First Victims of Spouse's Elaborate Fraud Scheme." The piece effectively neutralized Vanessa's insinuations about my involvement, instead positioning me as the initial target of a calculated betrayal that expanded to encompass dozens of investors. Most importantly, it established clear separation between my professional work at Summit Financial and Mike's fraudulent operation. The article's publication coincided with another significant development. Vanessa's bail was revoked following her unauthorized attempt to access Blue Mountain Lodge. Detective Garcia delivered the news personally. She's back in custody and likely to remain there until trial. The prosecutor has added charges of attempted theft and violation of bail conditions. With Vanessa contained and the media narrative clarified, I felt ready to take more proactive steps toward rebuilding. Working with David, I developed a comprehensive financial recovery plan addressing both immediate needs and long-term security. Blue Mountain Lodge remained the cornerstone of this strategy. The summer rental season was in full swing, generating substantial monthly income that provided operating capital while legal proceedings advanced. David helped establish protected accounts and verification protocols to ensure neither Mike nor Vanessa could access these funds. Olivia coordinated with international asset recovery specialists to pursue the property in Belize and trace additional offshore accounts. The process would be lengthy, but initial findings were promising. Approximately $1.8 million had been identified in various holdings that could potentially be recovered. Most significantly, I made the decision to return to work at Summit Financial on a limited basis while continuing my recovery. Richard arranged a modified schedule that allowed me to service key clients while minimizing stress during my physical healing. "Your office is exactly as you left it," he assured me as he walked me through the quiet building on Sunday afternoon, preparing for my official return the following day. "And I've personally spoken with every team member to ensure you'll have the support you need." Standing in my office doorway, seeing the familiar space untouched by the chaos that had engulfed my personal life, I felt a surge of gratitude for this preserved piece of my identity. My certificates and credentials still hung on the wall. Client. Files remained neatly organized on shelves. My ergonomic chair waited at the precisely adjusted height I preferred. "Thank you for standing by me through this," I said, emotion making my voice rougher than intended. "Not every firm would have." Richard's response was immediate and firm. "Your integrity has never been in question, Rebecca. Not for a moment." My return to work provided more than financial stability. It offered a realm where my competence remained unquestioned, where the parameters of success were clear and measurable, where I still knew who I was and what I was capable of achieving. The routine of client meetings, market analysis, and portfolio adjustments created a stabilizing rhythm that helped anchor me through the continuing revelations of the fraud investigation. Each morning at Summit represented another step toward reclaiming my professional identity, regardless of what the legal proceedings might uncover about my personal life. 3 weeks after my return to work, David arrived at Olivia's house with news that would significantly alter our recovery strategy. Through his forensic investigation of Mike's business records, he had identified a legitimate real estate opportunity buried within the fraudulent development portfolio. The West Side Market project, he explained, spreading architectural plans across the dining table. Unlike the other developments, this one has actual substance. The property exists, permits have been filed, and preliminary work has begun. Most importantly, it's funded through a separate LLC with relatively clean investment capital. The project involved transforming an abandoned warehouse in Lakeside Ridge's West Side district into a year-round indoor market featuring local vendors, crafts, and fresh produce, addressing the neighborhood's status as a food desert while creating jobs and community space. The concept is sound, David continued. The financials are realistic. With proper management, this could actually succeed where Mike's other projects were merely facades. "Why are you bringing this to me?" I asked, though I already suspected. His direction. "Because there's an opportunity here. The project is currently in limbo because its nominal director, Mike, has disappeared under investigation. The investors are considering writing it off as a loss, but with the right leadership, it could be salvaged." "You're suggesting I take it over," I stated, neither accepting nor dismissing the idea. David nodded. "You have the financial expertise to restructure it legitimately. You understand the distinction between this and the fraudulent projects. And perhaps most importantly, it represents an opportunity to create something positive from the wreckage Mike left behind." The concept was both compelling and deeply ironic, taking one of Mike's development ideas and making it genuine, transforming his illusion into reality. It would require careful legal navigation to separate this project from the broader fraud investigation, transparent communication with existing investors, and significant personal investment of my time and expertise. "I need to think about this," I told David, not ready to commit, but unable to dismiss the possibility. That evening, seeking clarity, I drove to Blue Mountain Lodge for the first time since my hospitalization. The 2-hour journey into the mountains gave me space to process everything that had happened and consider potential paths forward. The lodge stood as I remembered, a magnificent A-frame structure nestled among pine trees, its broad windows reflecting the last golden light of sunset. Stepping inside felt like connecting with a past self, the woman who had inherited this property from her grandmother, who had maintained it separately from her marriage, who had instinctively protected this piece of her identity even while sharing everything else with Mike. The property manager had prepared the master suite for my arrival, lighting a fire in the stone fireplace and leaving a simple meal in the refrigerator. I moved through the space slowly, reconnecting with its details, the hand-hewn beams, the panoramic views of the lake below, the carefully selected furnishings that blended rustic charm with understated luxury. This was what Mike had showcased to clients and investors, claiming credit for its development and design. This was what he had planned to somehow acquire from me, according to the notes found on the USB drive. This was what had remained beyond his reach, preserving my financial independence when he had stripped away everything else. Standing on the deck overlooking the darkening lake, I made 2 decisions. First, I would pursue the West Side Market project, salvaging something constructive from Mike's fraudulent operations. Second, I would take more direct control of Blue Mountain Lodge's management, perhaps expanding its potential beyond simple vacation rentals. These projects, one reclaimed from Mike's deceptions, one protected from his reach, would become the foundation for rebuilding my life on my own terms. They represented both recovery and reinvention, addressing the past while creating something new. I spent the weekend at the lodge, using the solitude to develop detailed plans for both initiatives. By Sunday evening, I had drafted a comprehensive proposal for restructuring the West Side Market project and created preliminary concepts for enhancing Blue Mountain Lodge's operations. Returning to Lakeside Ridge on Monday, I presented my West Side Market proposal to Olivia for legal review. Her initial skepticism gave way to cautious optimism as she examined the documentation. "It's actually viable," she acknowledged. "And with proper legal structure to isolate it from the fraud investigation, it could proceed without entanglement in Mike's other activities." "Can you help me set up the necessary legal framework?" I asked. "I want complete transparency with existing investors and clear separation from anything associated with Mike's fraud." "It won't be simple," she warned. "But yes, it's doable. I'll start drafting the documents." With Olivia working on the legal aspects, I arranged a meeting with Detective Garcia to ensure my planned activities wouldn't interfere with the ongoing investigations. "Actually, this could be helpful," she noted after reviewing my proposal. "Stabilizing the one legitimate project creates clarity about which developments were fraudulent. It also potentially preserves some value for defrauded investors who might otherwise lose everything." "Would my involvement create complications for the prosecution?" I asked directly. "Not if properly structured and disclosed," she assured me. "In fact, your financial expertise could help unravel the legitimate aspects from the fraudulent ones." With tentative approval from both legal and law enforcement perspectives, I scheduled a meeting with the original investors in the West Side Market Project. 5 people gathered in Summit Financial's conference room: a local restaurateur, 2 small business owners, a neighborhood advocate, and a retired architect. "Thank you for coming," I began, conscious of their likely skepticism. "I know you've all been left in a difficult position by my husband's actions. I've asked you here because the West Side Market Project, unlike Mike's other developments, appears to have legitimate potential that might be salvaged." I presented my analysis of the project's viability, outlined a transparent management structure, and proposed a path forward that would protect their existing investments while creating actual community value. "Why would you do this?" asked Helena Diaz, the neighborhood advocate. "After what your husband did to you and others." "Because creating something positive from this situation matters to me," I answered honestly. "And because this particular project addresses real community needs in the West Side District." "What's in it for you?" questioned James Chen, the restaurateur, not confrontational but pragmatic. "Professional redemption in part," I acknowledged, "but also the opportunity to demonstrate that ethical development is possible. My financial compensation would be structured as a small percentage of operational profits after the market is functional, ensuring my interests align with project success." The discussion continued for hours, moving from skepticism to cautious engagement, as the investors recognized my sincerity and expertise. By meeting's end, we had established a provisional agreement to create New Horizon Development, a transparent, community-focused entity to complete the market project under my financial direction. "We'll need to restructure everything," warned Martin Ellis, the retired architect. "New contracts, clear financial separation from Cooper Urban Renewal, proper permits transferred." "I have legal counsel already working on the framework," I assured him. "Complete transparency will be our founding principle." As the investors departed, Helena lingered behind. "I fought for years to get sustainable development in Westside," she said quietly. "When Mike Cooper presented this market concept, it seemed like exactly what we needed. Finding out it was part of a fraud scheme was devastating for the community." "It doesn't have to be fraudulent anymore," I told her. "With proper management and genuine commitment, this market can become what was promised." She studied me carefully before responding. "I believe you mean that, and I'll help however I can." That evening, sitting in Olivia's living room with the preliminary agreement spread around me, I felt something I hadn't experienced since discovering Mike's betrayal: a sense of agency and purpose beyond mere survival or recovery. I was no longer just reclaiming what had been taken. I was creating something new from the wreckage. David arrived with updated financial projections for both the market project and Blue Mountain Lodge's enhanced operations. "The numbers work," he confirmed, reviewing my calculations. Tight initially, but sustainable with reasonable growth projections. I'll need to secure additional financing for the market completion, I noted. The existing investment capital isn't sufficient after Mike's misappropriations. I've been speaking with several potential funding sources, David replied. There's interest, especially with your financial background and the community-focused nature of the project. We were deep in discussion when Detective Garcia called with breaking news. Becca, we've located Mike. Interpol apprehended him attempting to board a flight from San Jose, Costa Rica to Singapore with falsified travel documents. The news hit with unexpected force, a sudden concrete connection to the husband who had become almost mythical in his absence, a ghost defined by the destruction he'd left behind rather than physical presence. What happens now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Extradition proceedings will begin immediately. Given the multiple federal charges and the evidence we've compiled, we anticipate cooperation from Costa Rican authorities. It may take several weeks, but he will be returned to face charges. After the call ended, I sat in silence, processing the implications. Mike would return, not as the husband I had known, but as a defendant in a major fraud case. I would likely need to testify against him, to face him across a courtroom while detailing his betrayal. Are you okay? Olivia asked gently. Surprisingly, yes, I realized. It's actually a relief to know he'll face consequences, that this won't end, with him simply disappearing with what he stole. That night, reviewing everything that had transpired over the past 6 weeks since my surgery, I recognized how far I had come from those first devastating moments of discovery in the hospital. I had moved from victim to advocate, from betrayed spouse to independent financial strategist, from recovery to reinvention. Mike's capture represented another milestone in this journey. Not an ending, but a necessary step toward resolution and justice. Whatever came next, I would face it not as the woman he had betrayed and abandoned, but as someone stronger, wiser, and increasingly centered in her own power. The challenges ahead remained substantial. The legal proceedings would be complex and likely lengthy. The market project would require intensive effort to restructure and complete. Blue Mountain Lodge's enhanced operations would demand attention and investment. Yet for the first time since awakening to discover my emptied accounts, I felt genuine. Optimism about the future, not just about surviving Mike's betrayal, but about thriving despite it, perhaps even because of it. The path forward was becoming increasingly clear, illuminated not by what had been lost, but by what could still be created. Mike's extradition took longer than anticipated. The legal machinery moved with deliberate slowness across international boundaries, delayed by procedural challenges and jurisdictional complications. 3 months passed between his capture in Costa Rica and his return to Lakeside Ridge in handcuffs, escorted by federal agents. I didn't attend his arraignment. Instead, I was at the West Side Market construction site, reviewing progress with the project manager and Helena Diaz. The abandoned warehouse was transforming, its century-old brick walls now embracing new purpose, its cavernous interior subdivided into vendor stalls with soaring ceilings preserved. The work was proceeding exactly as scheduled, something Helena noted with appreciation. "When you took this over, I honestly doubted we'd get this far," she admitted as we walked through the space. "Most projects like this hit delays, cost overruns, compromise after compromise. Transparency and realistic planning make a difference," I replied, watching electricians install energy-efficient lighting designed to complement the building's industrial character. No hidden agendas, no false promises. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Arraignment complete. Remanded without bail. Trial date set for February. Call when you can." I showed the message to Helena, who understood its significance. In the months since discovering Mike's betrayal, I'd found unexpected allies in the West Side community. Helena had become not just a project partner, but a friend. Someone who appreciated both my professional competence and personal resilience. "Will you need to testify?" she asked as we continued our inspection. "Eventually. The prosecutor says my testimony will be important for establishing the timeline and personal aspects of the fraud." "How do you feel about facing him in court?" The question deserved honest consideration. Ready, I realized. Not eager, but ready. What he did needs to be acknowledged publicly, with consequences. We completed our site walk, finalizing decisions about vendor space allocation and community areas. The market was scheduled to open in 6 weeks, exactly in time for the holiday season, providing local artisans and food producers a venue during the most profitable retail period of the year. Later that afternoon, I met with Olivia to discuss the arraignment details. Mike had entered not guilty pleas to all charges, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. His court-appointed attorney had requested a mental health evaluation, suggesting psychological issues had contributed to his actions. "Standard defense strategy," Olivia noted, attempting to establish diminished capacity or mitigating factors. "Will it work?" I asked, wondering if he might somehow escape full responsibility through legal maneuvering. "Highly unlikely given the evidence of prolonged methodical planning. The USB drive alone demonstrates clear premeditation and awareness of wrongdoing." The prosecutor had filed additional charges based on evidence recovered during the international investigation: money laundering, passport fraud, and conspiracy charges related to Mike's dealings with offshore financial institutions. The potential sentence now approached 30 years if convicted on all counts. "Have they recovered any additional assets?" I asked, always practical about the financial aspects. "Yes, actually. The Belize property has been seized, and 3 additional accounts have been frozen in Singapore. Combined value of approximately $2.3 million. It represented slightly more than half of what had been taken from me personally, not counting losses, to investors. The recovery process would continue regardless of the criminal proceedings, but realistically, some portion of the stolen funds had likely disappeared permanently into untraceable channels." "What about Vanessa's trial?" I asked, turning to the other pending legal matter. "Scheduled for next month. Her attorney has approached the prosecutor about a potential plea agreement in exchange for comprehensive testimony against Mike." The siblings' united front had crumbled predictably when faced with serious criminal consequences. Vanessa was apparently willing to testify that Mike had orchestrated everything, presenting herself as merely following his instructions without understanding their illegality. "Do you believe her?" I asked, having difficulty imagining Vanessa as an unwitting accomplice to anything. "Not remotely," Olivia replied frankly. "The evidence shows her actively participating in account transfers and property acquisition. But her testimony could still be valuable for the prosecution." As Olivia gathered her materials to leave, she paused. "There's one more thing you should know. Mike has requested a meeting with you." The statement landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of discomfort through my carefully constructed equilibrium. "Why would I agree to that?" I asked, genuinely perplexed. "You wouldn't, necessarily. But his attorney suggested he has information about additional hidden assets that he's willing to share only with you directly." The proposition carried the distinct aroma of manipulation, another attempt to exert control from behind bars, to force an interaction on his terms. "Tell the prosecutor I'll consider it only if Mike first provides written details about these supposed assets, authenticated by his attorney," I decided. "No fishing expeditions, no vague promises, no psychological games." Olivia nodded approvingly. "Perfect response. I'll convey that immediately." That evening, driving to Blue Mountain Lodge for the weekend, I reflected on how dramatically my life had evolved in the 4 months since my surgery. I had moved out of Olivia's guest room into a comfortable apartment in downtown Lakeside Ridge. I had returned to full-time work at Summit Financial, where my client portfolio was performing exceptionally well despite market fluctuations. I was actively directing the Westside Market project toward its upcoming opening. Most significantly, I had transformed my relationship with Blue Mountain Lodge from passive ownership to active development. Working with Thomas Reynolds from Highland Property Management, I had implemented a strategic enhancement of the property, adding a small conference facility that allowed for corporate retreats during traditional off-seasons, thereby stabilizing the revenue stream year-round. The lodge had become my weekend sanctuary and increasingly profitable asset, its income now structured through a legally fortified trust that would remain protected regardless of the outcome of Mike's trial, or any associated civil proceedings. As I arrived at the lodge and settled in for the evening, my phone rang with a call from David Chen. "The forensic accounting for the investor fraud is finally complete," he reported. 18 investors lost a total of $14.6 million through Cooper Urban Renewal's fictitious projects. The documentation is comprehensive enough for both criminal prosecution and civil recovery efforts. "What about the Westside Market investors?" I asked, concerned about the 5 people who had trusted me to salvage that project. "Their situation is distinct, as we've established. The new legal entity you created has properly segregated their remaining legitimate investment from the fraudulent operations. The prosecutor has formally acknowledged this separation in court filings. It was crucial validation of my careful restructuring efforts, official recognition that the market project could proceed independently of the fraud case, protecting those investors from being entangled in the broader legal proceedings. There's something else," David continued. "Based on the forensic work we've done, several financial institutions have approached me about consulting on fraud prevention protocols. They're specifically interested in the patterns we identified in Mike's operations." "That's excellent," I said, genuinely pleased for him. "Your work deserves recognition." "Actually," he said, sounding uncharacteristically hesitant, "they're interested in both of us providing insight. Your perspective as both a financial professional and someone who experienced this type of fraud personally adds a dimension they value." The suggestion caught me off guard. I hadn't considered that my experience might have broader professional applications beyond my own recovery. "I'd need to think about that," I told him. "It's still very personal." "Of course. Just something to consider for the future." After we disconnected, I walked onto the lodge's expansive deck, watching moonlight silver the lake below. The idea of transforming my traumatic experience into professional expertise that might help others was both unsettling and intriguing. Could the painful lessons I'd learned serve a purpose beyond my individual situation? The following morning, Thomas arrived to review the conference facility renovations, which were nearing completion. "Bookings are already coming in for the spring quarter," he reported. "The corporate retreat concept is resonating exactly as you projected." We toured the new space, a thoughtfully designed meeting area with state-of-the-art technology seamlessly integrated into the lodge's rustic aesthetic. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed mountain views, while comfortable seating areas encouraged both collaboration and reflection. "The first booking is particularly interesting," Thomas noted as we completed the inspection. "Summit Financial wants to hold their quarterly strategy retreat here in March." Richard had mentioned the possibility, but I hadn't expected him to move forward so quickly. "That's wonderful. We'll need to ensure everything is perfect for that inaugural corporate event." "There's one other development you should know about," Thomas added as we walked back to the main lodge. "Someone has been making inquiries about purchasing the property." "Blue Mountain Lodge isn't for sale," I responded immediately. I informed them of that, but they've been persistent, offering to present an exceptional proposal that might change your mind. "Who's making the inquiry?" I asked, curious despite my lack of interest in selling. "A development company called Vista Horizon. They've acquired several premium properties in the region recently." The name was unfamiliar, likely one of many investment groups buying recreational properties as alternative assets. "If they contact you again, reiterate that the lodge is not available at any price." Later that day, I received a call from Detective Garcia. "I thought you should hear this directly from me," she began. "We've discovered evidence that Mike may have attempted to influence your medical treatment during your hospitalization." My blood chilled. "What kind of influence?" "Communications with a hospital employee asking about medication timing and requesting notifications about your condition changes. Nothing that directly endangered you," she clarified quickly, "but inappropriate access to your medical information and potential opportunity creation." "Was someone at the hospital collaborating with him?" I asked, thinking of the various staff who had cared for me. "A pharmacy technician with financial difficulties. He's cooperating with the investigation now. There's no evidence he actually modified your treatment in any way, but he did provide updates to Mike about your condition and medication schedule." The revelation added another disturbing layer to Mike's betrayal, not just taking advantage of my medical crisis, but potentially attempting to influence its duration or severity to maximize his opportunity window. "Will this result in additional charges?" I asked, struggling to process this new information. "Yes. The prosecutor is adding counts related to medical privacy violations and potentially attempted harm, depending on how the evidence develops." After hanging up, I sat motionless on the lodge's sofa, watching flames flicker in the stone fireplace while absorbing this latest revelation. How deeply had Mike's calculation run? Had he actually hoped for complications during my surgery? Had he been disappointed by my recovery? These questions might never be fully answered, even with a complete investigation. Some aspects of betrayal remained fundamentally unknowable, the private thoughts and intentions that lived only in the betrayer's mind. Rather than dwelling on these unanswerable questions, I turned my attention to finalizing preparations for the Westside Market opening, now just 5 weeks away. The vendor application process had been remarkably competitive, with over 60 local businesses applying for the 35 available spaces. Helena and I had carefully curated the selection to ensure a balanced mix of food producers, artisans, and specialty retailers that would serve community needs while creating a distinctive shopping destination. The following week brought 2 significant developments. First, Mike submitted the written asset disclosure I had demanded as a precondition for any meeting. His statement, authenticated by his attorney, identified 3 additional accounts in Panama and a property in Ecuador held through multiple shell companies. "Is this information credible?" I asked David after forwarding him the disclosure. "Appears to be," he confirmed after research. "The account numbers match our partial traces, and the property ownership aligns with corporate structures we'd identified, but couldn't fully penetrate. And he's only revealing this now because these assets are likely to be discovered, eventually through the ongoing investigation. By disclosing them voluntarily, he may be hoping for consideration during sentencing." The prosecutor agreed with this assessment, but still encouraged me to meet with Mike, believing he might reveal additional information in person that he had withheld from the written disclosure. After careful consideration and lengthy discussion with both Olivia and my therapist, I agreed to a strictly controlled meeting at the detention facility. Olivia would accompany me, the conversation would be recorded, and I could terminate it at any point. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. In the meantime, I focused on the second significant development, the final preparations for the Westside Market opening. The construction was complete, vendors were installing their individual stalls, and marketing materials emphasized both the community-focused mission and the market's phoenix-like emergence from a previously fraudulent development. Local media had picked up the story enthusiastically, portraying the market as a triumph of ethical development over fraudulent practices. Kate Russell, the reporter who had written the initial article about my innocence in Mike's schemes, produced a feature about the market's journey from fraud to community asset, highlighting my role in its transformation. "You've become something of a local hero," Helena remarked as we walked through the nearly completed market 3 days before the scheduled opening. The financial advisor who not only survived her husband's betrayal, but turned his fake project into something real for the community. "That wasn't my intention," I said, somewhat uncomfortable with the characterization. "Intentions aside, it's what you've done," she insisted. "People respond to that narrative because it's hopeful. It suggests that even after terrible betrayal, something positive can emerge." The vendors working on their spaces greeted me warmly as we passed, many expressing gratitude for the opportunity. Maria Gutierrez, whose family bakery had operated from a tiny storefront for 3 generations, proudly showed us her newly installed display cases. Jamal Washington demonstrated the custom lighting he'd designed for his artisanal furniture booth. The Chen family arranged vibrant produce in their farm-to-table stall. These small business owners had invested their hopes and limited capital in this market. Their enthusiasm reinforced my determination to ensure the project succeeded, not just opening successfully, but thriving long-term. The weekend before the market opening, and my scheduled meeting with Mike, I retreated to Blue Mountain Lodge to center myself for both events. Saturday morning, I was reviewing final market launch details when Thomas arrived unexpectedly. "I apologize for the weekend intrusion," he said, "but I thought you should see this immediately." He handed me a thick envelope containing a formal purchase offer for Blue Mountain Lodge from Vista Horizon Development. The proposed amount was staggering, nearly triple the property's already substantial market value. "This arrived by courier this morning," Thomas explained, along with some supporting materials. The accompanying documents included glossy renderings of a proposed luxury resort development that would replace the lodge with a sprawling complex of high-end condominiums, a spa, and exclusive amenities. The final page contained profile information about Vista Horizon, including its executive team. My breath caught as I recognized a familiar name among the listed partners, Vanessa Cooper. "Thomas, can you determine when this company was formed?" I asked, my mind already connecting dots. He was ahead of me, pulling additional research from his briefcase. "Incorporated 7 months ago. The ownership structure is complex, multiple LLCs and offshore entities, but we've confirmed Vanessa Cooper holds a significant position. 7 months ago, before my surgery, before the account draining, before Mike's flight to Belize. This development company had been part of their exit strategy from the beginning, likely intended as the vehicle for reinvesting stolen funds into legitimate-appearing assets. I immediately contacted Detective Garcia, forwarding the purchase offer and company information. "This connects Vanessa to long-term planning that predates my hospitalization," I explained. "It undermines her claim of being an unwitting participant." "This is extremely valuable," the detective confirmed. "The prosecutor has been negotiating her plea deal. This evidence will significantly alter those discussions." After ending the call, I studied the renderings more carefully. The proposed development was exactly the kind of exclusive, environmentally questionable project that was changing the character of the Lakeside region, catering to wealthy part-time residents while providing minimal community benefit. "Please inform Vista Horizon that Blue Mountain Lodge remains unavailable at any price," I told Thomas, "and add that any future communications should come through legal channels, given Ms. Cooper's involvement in pending criminal matters." The attempted purchase represented Vanessa's continued efforts to acquire the lodge, first through Mike's marital claims, then through her bail-violating visit, and now through a corporate front. The property clearly held special significance in their planning, perhaps because Mike had used it so prominently in establishing his fraudulent developer credentials. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The West Side Market would open to the public at noon, while my meeting with Mike was scheduled for 9 a.m. I had deliberately arranged this sequence, wanting the positive milestone to follow the difficult confrontation. Olivia picked me up at 7:30, giving us time to prepare before the detention facility meeting. "Remember, you control this interaction," she reminded me as we drove. "You've agreed to listen to what he has to say about additional assets, nothing more." You can end the meeting at any point." "I know," I assured her. "I'm ready for this." The detention facility was institutional and impersonal. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, the pervasive scent of industrial cleaning products. After security, screening, we were escorted to a private meeting room where recording equipment had been installed per our requirements. Mike was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. The change in his appearance was startling. He had lost weight, his formerly precise haircut had grown out unevenly, and the polished confidence that had once been his defining characteristic had diminished considerably. He stared at me as the guard secured him to the table, his expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. "Becca," he began when the guard stepped back. "Thank you for coming." "This isn't a social visit," I replied evenly. "You claim to have information about additional assets that weren't included in your written disclosure." His mouth tightened slightly at my businesslike tone. "Always straight to the point. That's something I've always admired about you." "The assets, Mike. That's the only reason I'm here." He glanced at Olivia, clearly unhappy about her presence, then back to me. "There's a safety deposit box at First International Bank in Panama City. Box number 4729. The key is hidden in a compartment beneath the master bathroom vanity in our house, the loose tile near the right corner." "What does the box contain?" I asked, making notes. "Bearer bonds, primarily. Some gold coins. Approximate. Value around 600,000. "And you didn't include this in your written disclosure because?" He shrugged slightly. "I wanted to see you, to explain in person." "Explain what?" "How you systematically drained our accounts while I was unconscious. In a hospital bed? How you forged documents and stole from investors? How you monitored my medical condition looking for an opportunity?" My voice remained steady despite the emotions roiling beneath the surface. This was the first time I had directly confronted him since discovering his betrayal. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way," he said, leaning forward. "The plan was more gradual, less damaging to you. But things accelerated when investors started asking questions. Your surgery created an unexpected opportunity." "An opportunity you'd been preparing for," I noted. "The USB drive we found showed months of planning, Mike. Surveillance of my activities, copies of my medical records, notes about my asset holdings." He didn't deny it. "I needed financial freedom. The business was collapsing. Investors were demanding returns I couldn't produce. So you decided to steal from me instead, from clients who trusted you." "I intended to make it right eventually," he claimed, the familiar persuasive tone creeping back into his voice. "Once I was established elsewhere, had the development company profitable." "Vista Horizon," I interrupted. "Vanessa's latest attempt to acquire Blue Mountain Lodge." Surprise flickered across his face. "You know about that?" "I know about all of it, Mike. The fraudulent projects, the investor deception, using my property in your marketing materials, attempting to influence my medical care, creating a development company to launder stolen funds." His expression shifted, calculation replacing the attempt at emotional connection. "If you know everything, then you understand I could still help you recover more assets than the authorities will find on their own." "In exchange for what?" "Testifying. On your behalf? Supporting a reduced sentence?" "In exchange for a fresh start when this is over," he said, voice dropping to an intimate tone. "We had something real once, Becca. Before things got complicated. We could rebuild when I get out." The suggestion was so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that I actually laughed. A short, disbelieving sound that seemed to startle him. "Mike, I'm not here because I have any interest in reconciliation. I'm here because the prosecutor believed you might reveal additional stolen assets. Since you've done that, this meeting is concluded." I stood to leave, but his next words stopped me momentarily. "You've done well with the West Side market," he said, taking my concept and making it real. That's impressive. The compliment, if it was intended as such, missed its mark entirely. It's not your concept anymore. It belongs to the community now, to the vendors who will open their businesses there today. Your contribution was creating a shell that others had to fill with actual substance. As Olivia and I moved toward the door, he called after me. The lodge looks good too. The conference facility was always the logical expansion. I turned back briefly. You never owned the lodge, Mike. You never will. Neither will Vanessa or Vista Horizon. Some things were always beyond your reach. As we exited the facility, Olivia gave my arm a supportive squeeze. You handled that perfectly. Gave him nothing while getting the asset information. The meeting had been less emotionally taxing than I had anticipated. Seeing Mike diminished, attempting to manipulate me with the same techniques that had once been effective, only reinforced how far I had traveled from the woman who had trusted him implicitly. We drove directly to the West Side Market, arriving just as vendors were completing their final preparations for the noon opening. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, signs being adjusted, products arranged, staff receiving last-minute instructions. Helena met us at the entrance, clipboard in hand. Everything's on schedule. Local media is already setting up. And there's actually a line forming outside. The official opening exceeded all expectations. Hundreds of community members flowed through the market during the first hours, exclaiming over the transformation of the once-abandoned warehouse and enthusiastically supporting the vendors. Local officials gave brief speeches praising the project as a model for community-centered development. Standing near the central fountain that served as the market's gathering space, watching families explore the stalls and vendors engage with customers, I felt a sense of completion that transcended the project itself. This thriving marketplace had emerged from the wreckage of Mike's fraudulent operation, not erasing that history, but transforming it into something genuinely valuable. Kate Russell approached with her photographer, capturing the scene for her follow-up piece. This is quite an achievement, she noted, especially given where it started. It succeeded because it's meeting real community needs, I replied, directing credit where it belonged. The vendors, the neighborhood advocates like Helena, they're the ones who gave it substance. Still, your role was crucial, Kate insisted. Taking a fraudulent concept and making it legitimate isn't something just anyone could accomplish. As the successful opening continued, I received a call from Detective Garcia. I wanted you to know immediately, she said. Based on the Vista Horizon information you provided and your meeting with Mike this morning, Vanessa's plea deal has been rescinded. The prosecutor is proceeding with full charges against her. Another piece of justice falling into place. What? About the safety deposit box Mike mentioned? We're already working with Panamanian authorities to secure it. If his information proves accurate, it will be added to the recovery total. By evening, as the market's first day concluded with impressive sales figures and vendor satisfaction, I recognized that a significant chapter was closing. The West Side Market was launched, operating independently of my daily involvement. Mike and Vanessa were facing justice through the legal system. Blue Mountain Lodge was secure and flourishing with its expanded business model. The long process of recovery, financial, professional, and emotional, had evolved into genuine transformation. I was no longer defined primarily as a victim of betrayal, but as the architect of a remarkable rebuilding. Standing in the market's central court after the last customers had departed, Helena joined me in surveying what we had accomplished. "What comes next for you?" she asked. "Now that this project is successfully launched?" It was a question I had been considering with increasing clarity. "I'm exploring ways to combine my financial expertise with community development," I told her. "There are other struggling neighborhoods that could benefit from this model of ethical investment and transparent development. Creating a specialty? Practice within Summit. Perhaps eventually something more independent," I admitted. "I've been discussing possibilities with David Chen about creating a consulting firm focused on community-centered financial structures." Helena smiled knowingly. From reclaiming what was stolen to building something entirely new. That's quite a journey in less than 6 months. Indeed it was. A journey from betrayal to empowerment, from loss to creation, from victim to visionary. The path forward was increasingly clear, illuminated not by what had been taken from me, but by what I had discovered I could build from the foundation of that experience. 1 year later, the view from my new office window showcased the Lakeside Ridge skyline in the golden light of late afternoon. Glass and steel towers reflected the setting sun, while historic brick buildings anchored the business district in its industrial past. I stood watching the pedestrians below, office workers heading home, tourists exploring downtown shops, locals gathering at sidewalk cafes, all part of the vibrant community I now viewed through a different lens. The past 12 months had transformed both my personal circumstances and professional identity in ways I could never have anticipated while lying in that hospital bed discovering my emptied accounts. With each challenge overcome and each project completed, I had rebuilt not just my financial security but my entire approach to life and work. Cooper Chen Community Development Partners now occupied the entire top floor of the renovated Parkside building. What had begun as casual conversations between David and me about combining our respective expertise had evolved into a thriving consultancy specializing in financially sustainable community development projects. Our client list included municipalities, ethical investors, and neighborhood associations seeking alternatives to traditional gentrification models. My desk phone buzzed with my assistant's voice. "Your 4 o'clock is here, the Eastside Commons. Committee." "Send them in, Andrea," I replied, gathering materials for the meeting. 5 community representatives entered, led by Helena Diaz, whose successful advocacy for the Westside market had made her a respected voice in Lakeside Ridge's development conversations. Our professional relationship had deepened into genuine friendship over the past year as we collaborated on expanding the community-centered investment model to other neighborhoods. "The renderings look exceptional," Helena said after introductions, referring to the preliminary designs for the Eastside Commons project, a mixed-use development combining affordable housing with small business incubator spaces and community facilities. But the financing structure is what really excites us. I spread the financial projections across the conference table. It's similar to what we created for Westside, but with refinements based on what we learned there. The community ownership component is substantially expanded. For the next hour, we walked through the innovative financing model that would allow neighborhood residents to build equity in the development through both investment and sweat equity contributions. The structure ensured the project would serve existing community members rather than displacing them, creating wealth-building opportunities within a framework of sustainable development. As the meeting concluded successfully, Helena lingered behind. "Have you seen the latest figures from the market?" she asked. "Vendor revenue up 17% for the quarter," I confirmed. "The winter farmers market expansion is exceeding projections." She nodded, pleased but not surprised. It's become a case study in successful community development. The city council referenced it specifically when approving the Eastside Commons zoning variances. The Westside market had evolved from tentative launch to neighborhood anchor in just 12 months. All 35 original vendors had renewed their leases, while the waiting list for available spaces had grown to over 80 businesses. The market had created more than 200 jobs and served as a vital food access point in what had previously been a food desert. "I still walk through sometimes just to watch it functioning," I admitted. "It's tangible proof that ethical development can succeed financially while serving community needs." After Helena departed, I reviewed correspondence that had arrived during the meeting. Among the emails was a notification from the Department of Justice regarding the ongoing asset recovery process. Additional funds had been identified in a Luxembourg account, bringing the total recovered to nearly $4.7 million, approximately 70% of what had been stolen from me and other victims. The legal proceedings against Mike and Vanessa had concluded 6 months earlier. Mike had eventually accepted a plea agreement, receiving a 17-year sentence for multiple federal fraud charges. Vanessa, after her attempt to negotiate leniency failed, had received 8 years for her role in the conspiracy. I had testified at both trials, calmly recounting the systematic betrayal I had experienced. Facing them across courtrooms had proven less emotionally challenging than anticipated. Their power over my life had diminished substantially as I built new foundations that had nothing to do with them. The civil proceedings had been equally successful. The court had granted comprehensive asset seizures, with recovered funds distributed proportionally among all identified victims. My comprehensive documentation and David's forensic expertise had been instrumental in maximizing these recoveries. Financial restitution, while important, had become almost secondary to the transformation of my professional life. Cooper Chen. Community Development Partners had quickly established itself as an innovative leader in ethical urban revitalization, attracting clients and attention nationwide. Summit Financial had become one of our primary investment partners, with Richard serving on our advisory board. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Court just approved the final settlement distribution. Celebration dinner tonight? The usual place, 7 p.m. I texted back my agreement, smiling at the significance of this milestone. The final settlement marked the official conclusion of all legal proceedings related to Mike's fraud. While some stolen assets would likely never be recovered, the justice system had functioned with remarkable effectiveness given the complexity of the case. Olivia had been instrumental throughout the process, guiding me through legal challenges while providing unwavering personal support. Our friendship had deepened through the crisis, evolving into a bond of mutual respect and affection that transcended professional collaboration. As I gathered materials for my next appointment, a conference call with potential investors for the Eastside Commons project, David knocked lightly on my office door. "The presentation for tomorrow's conference is finalized," he said, referring to our upcoming keynote address at the National Urban Development Symposium. The case studies are compelling, especially the financial outcomes from Westside. Our presentation, titled Community-Centered Investment: Sustainable Models for Ethical Urban Development, had become one of the most anticipated sessions of the prestigious conference. The approach we had pioneered with the Westside market was attracting attention from development professionals, community advocates, and ethical investors nationwide. "I've been thinking about expanding the Blue Mountain Lodge model as part of our portfolio," I told him, sharing an idea that had been taking shape for weeks. "The conference facility has been so successful that I'm considering a similar approach for other underutilized vacation properties in the region." David nodded thoughtfully. "Creating meeting spaces that generate year-round revenue while maintaining environmental sustainability. It aligns perfectly with our overall approach." Blue Mountain Lodge had thrived under my more direct management, with the conference facility consistently booked months in advance. The property now generated nearly double its previous income, while maintaining its character and environmental integrity. Summit Financial had indeed held their quarterly retreat there, with Richard subsequently recommending the venue to partner firms. Vista Horizon Development had dissolved following Vanessa's conviction, its assets liquidated to satisfy civil judgments against her. The predatory development model it had represented, luxury properties catering exclusively to wealthy seasonal residents, was increasingly challenged by the community-centered approach our firm advocated. After finishing preparations for the investor call, I left the office early to visit the Westside Market before meeting Olivia for dinner. The Tuesday evening market was bustling with after-work shoppers, the atmosphere lively with conversation and activity. Vendors greeted me warmly as I walked through, many stopping to share recent successes or expansion plans. Maria Gutierrez waved me over to her bakery stall, now expanded to include a small cafe area where customers enjoyed her family's traditional pastries with locally roasted coffee. "We signed the lease for the second location," she announced proudly. "The downtown shop opens next month." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely delighted by her success. From one small stall to 2 locations in just a year. It wouldn't have happened without the market giving us a stable place to grow, she acknowledged. My daughter is coming back from college to help manage the expansion. Stories like Maria's represented the market's true success, creating platforms for local entrepreneurs to build sustainable businesses that generated community wealth. The financial returns were impressive, but the human impact was immeasurable. Continuing through the market, I paused at the community bulletin board that had become a neighborhood hub. Announcements for local events, job postings, and educational opportunities covered the large cork surface. Prominently displayed was a flyer for the upcoming Westside Market Anniversary Celebration, a community festival marking 1 year since the successful opening. The event would feature vendor showcases, live music from local artists, and activities for neighborhood families. Most significantly, it would include the launch of the Westside Community Investment Fund, a micro-lending program funded by a percentage of market revenues that would provide startup capital for new local businesses. This self-sustaining economic ecosystem had emerged organically from the market's success, creating a virtuous cycle of community investment and development. What had begun as an effort to salvage one legitimate project from Mike's fraudulent operations had evolved into a model for neighborhood revitalization without displacement. After leaving the market, I drove to Blue Mountain Lodge. Dinner with Olivia wasn't for several hours yet, but I wanted time at the property that had played such a crucial role in my recovery. The winding mountain road was intimately familiar. Now, each curve and vista part of a journey I made at least weekly. The lodge stood against the darkening sky, its windows glowing with warm light set by the property manager in anticipation of my arrival. Inside, a fire had been prepared in the great room's stone fireplace, needing only a match to spring to life. I moved through the space that had been my sanctuary during the most challenging months of rebuilding. Here I had processed the betrayal, planned my recovery, and eventually conceived the vision for my new professional direction. The lodge had provided both financial security and emotional grounding when everything else seemed uncertain. Settling. In the great room with a glass of wine, I reviewed the past year's journey with clear-eyed perspective. The initial shock of discovery in that hospital room had given way to determined action, then to strategic rebuilding, and finally, to genuine transformation. The financial recovery had exceeded expectations. Between the lodge income, my continued work at Summit Financial, now as a specialized consultant rather than full-time advisor, and the growing success of Cooper Chen, my financial position was stronger than before Mike's betrayal. The professional evolution had been equally remarkable. Rather than simply returning to my previous career path, I had created something new that combined my financial expertise with newly discovered passion for community development. The work was more meaningful, the impact more tangible, the satisfaction deeper. Most importantly, the emotional recovery had been complete. The pain of betrayal had evolved into valuable wisdom about trust, relationship, and resilience. I no longer defined myself in relation to what had happened as a victim, a survivor, or even someone who had overcome adversity. Those experiences informed, but did not determine my identity. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Reynolds, the property manager. Conference facility booked solid through June. 3 more corporate inquiries this week. Need to discuss possible expansion. The consistent demand reflected both the quality of the facility and growing recognition of the lodge as a premium retreat destination. The expansion Thomas suggested would require significant investment, but promised substantial returns. Another opportunity to build on what my grandmother had created, and I had preserved. As twilight settled over the mountains, I gathered my things to drive back to Lakeside Ridge for dinner with Olivia. The celebration of the final settlement distribution represented more than legal closure. It marked the completion of a chapter that had begun with devastating betrayal and concluded with justice and transformation. Olivia was waiting at our usual table when I arrived at Terrazzo. the upscale Italian restaurant that had become our preferred venue for marking significant milestones. She raised her glass as I approached. "To the final distribution," she toasted, as I sat and the waiter poured champagne into my waiting glass. "And to you, the most impressive client and friend I've ever had the privilege to work with." "To partnership," I countered, including her in the recognition. "None of this would have happened without your guidance and support." "Maybe so," she acknowledged. "But most people facing what you discovered in that hospital room would have collapsed under the weight of it. You not only recovered what was taken, you built something entirely new and better." The conversation flowed easily as we enjoyed the excellent meal, touching on the legal conclusion, the Eastside Commons project, the upcoming conference presentation, and plans for expanding Cooper Chen's scope of work. "I've been approached about writing a book," I mentioned as we finished our entrees. "About the experience and the development model that emerged from it." Olivia's eyebrows raised with interest. "You should consider it. Your story is compelling, and the financial structure you've created deserves wider attention." "I'm not sure about sharing the personal aspects," I admitted. "But the community development model could benefit other neighborhoods facing similar challenges. The personal journey is what makes the professional innovation so powerful," she pointed out. "One emerged from the other. The betrayal you experienced led directly to the vision you created." Her perspective was valid. My professional evolution had been inseparable from the personal crisis that catalyzed it. The financial expertise I'd developed at Summit, combined with the hard lessons of betrayal, had created something neither would have produced independently. As we finished dinner, Olivia raised a final toast. "To the unexpected paths that lead to our best destinations." The sentiment resonated deeply. Nothing about my current life resembled what I had envisioned while married to Mike. The betrayal that had seemed devastating had ultimately redirected me toward greater purpose, impact, and fulfillment. Driving home to my downtown apartment, afterward, I reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed profound loss into unprecedented growth. Mike had emptied our accounts while I lay in a hospital bed, believing he had secured his future at the expense of mine. Instead, his actions had unwittingly launched me toward a future far more meaningful than the one we had shared. The final irony was that Blue Mountain Lodge, the property he had falsely claimed in his development marketing, the asset Vanessa had repeatedly attempted to acquire through various means, had been the foundation of my rebuilding. The very thing they had coveted but couldn't reach had sustained me while I created something beyond their imagination. My apartment building came into view, a renovated historic structure in Lakeside Ridge's Arts District that I had purchased 6 months earlier as both residence and investment. The property included 4 commercial spaces on the ground floor, all leased to local businesses, and 8 residential units above, including my spacious 2-bedroom home. The building represented my evolved approach to investment, financially sound while contributing to neighborhood vitality rather than displacing existing community. The commercial tenants included a local bookstore, an art gallery featuring regional artists, a small batch coffee roaster, and a neighborhood-serving legal clinic. As I parked in the building's secure garage, my phone lit up with a notification from the bank holding the final settlement distribution. The funds had been deposited, the last financial piece of the recovery process falling into place. Tomorrow would bring new projects, new challenges, new opportunities. The Eastside Commons financing needed finalization. The conference presentation required practice. The potential Blue Mountain Lodge expansion awaited decision. The book proposal deserved consideration. But tonight, I allowed myself to fully appreciate the journey completed. From the devastating discovery in that hospital room to this moment of comprehensive resolution, financial, professional, and emotional, the path had been neither straight nor easy. Yet each difficult step had led to this transformed life that I had built from the wreckage of betrayal. Mike had emptied our accounts while I was in hospital. When I recovered, I showed him the real account, Not just the financial resources he hadn't managed to steal, but the deeper reserves of resilience, creativity, and purpose that had always been mine alone. Those inner resources had proven more valuable than any material asset, generating returns that no market fluctuation could diminish and no betrayal could ever take away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.